Good morning, insiders. Welcome to your Monday download. I know it has been several weeks since I've got one of your downloads out to you. October has been a crazy month for me, so my apologies. Hopefully you've been getting some of my emails and keeping track of things on my blog. But here's your download for you. Got a couple of things I want to go over today. First, it's been ages since I've had a specific shout out that I wanted to give. And today's shout out goes to one of our network agents, Randy Wells with Windermere. I've been sending you information in some of your previous downloads and blog posts about some of the challenges with Fannie Mae. And just let me take 10 seconds to recap for you. One of the biggest challenges that Fannie Mae is giving us right now on the short sale transactions is that when they are approving them with a certain period of time until a foreclosure auction, they are not postponing the foreclosure auction to allow closing. So that means if there's 2 weeks till a foreclosure auction and we get an approval letter, it's usually only good through that 2 weeks. So you have 2 weeks to close. We've had some that have been 3 days to close because the auction's in 3 days. Now, we all know that if a buyer is starting their process to purchase the house and get their loan moving forward, they're not going to be able to get it done in 3 days. They're hard pressed to get it done in 2 weeks. Well, Randy recently had a Fannie Mae short sale, and Randy took to heart what Fannie Mae has been doing and did an absolutely incredible job getting the buyer on this transaction vested in the transaction. And the buyer actually did their appraisals, their inspections, final underwriting. Everything was completely ready for docs and closing before we even had an approval letter. And if Randy had not been able to accomplish that as the agent, the transaction would absolutely not have been able to close, because by the time we got the approval letter, we were only a few days away from auction. And fortunately, all we needed to do was get docs to the closing agent, get people in to sign, and get everything over to the lender. And that is what happened, and we were able to get the transaction closed successfully. And so this shout out is to Randy Wells for really doing what I think most agents on the planet would think not possible, and that is to get a buyer to put out money without the guarantee that they're going to get an approval letter and be able to close on their short sale transaction. And because of his ability to do that, he was able to close this short sale. So congratulations, Randy. Thank you for really being able to implement that strategy, because a lot of agents just would not have. They would have just said, well, we'll see what happens, and they would have lost that transaction and wouldn't have got paid. So way to go on that. The other thing that I want to talk about is the bank moratoriums. And this is something that's been in the media a lot. The major banks, Bank of America, Chase, some of these major banks that have been putting a moratorium on their foreclosure auctions. And so I'm getting tons of stuff from agents, emails, and posts on my blog and different things saying, hey, what about these bank moratoriums? What do you think of it? How's it going to affect short sales? How's it going to affect my clients for foreclosure? And those are all obviously good questions. What specifically I want to talk about is, well, first of all, if you're paying attention, Bank of America, who was the only bank to put a moratorium on all 50 states, has now, as of a week ago, actually literally on Monday, they lifted that moratorium in all of the states that have judicial foreclosures, meaning that it has to go into a court. That is, at this moment, they're still having a moratorium on their non-judicial, and basically the bottom line is that the banks are simply, all they're doing is getting their ducks in a row. They've run into some resistance, they've run into some legal situations where they've been accused of not having their paperwork in order, and I want to dispel the myth that it's to help your seller or to do the right thing. It really is simply to get their ducks in a row, their paperwork in order, their processes fine-tuned, so that they can get that foreclosure train back on the track and get moving. And we can see that because Bank of America's moratorium really was only like a week and a half before they lifted almost 50% of it. So one of the other articles that I saw was that MERS, any loan that has been sold with MERS, they're having trouble proving ownership because of the fact that it has moved back and forth and there hasn't been the physical recording of documents to prove that ownership. And what I did, actually, I sent some of this stuff to one of our attorneys. His name's Robert Rowley, and I'll just give a little plug for Rob right now. If you're in Washington or Idaho, he's licensed in both states, and he is hands down one of the best attorneys that we work with as far as real estate knowledge, just general business entity law and litigation. He is one of the best. And what I did is I emailed him. I said, "Hey, Rob, what do you think about this stuff? And what does this mean? I mean, is this going to make it easier for us in the short sale world to be able to get postponements because banks aren't going to be able to foreclose? What is this all about?" And I'll kind of just paraphrase some of his email here. He basically said, "I don't see this being a big issue. Some merely lenders having paperwork problems in bankruptcy courts, which are always debtor friendly. The principal reason why you're not going to see this kind of a transaction as a defense is a public policy." And he goes on and he specifies a court action that he was part of where the lender had inadvertently removed the deed of trust. They reconveyed their security interest in the property, and the homeowner said, "Oh, well, I own this property free and clear because you reconveyed my deed of trust." Well, the reality is that the intent was not there, and the payoff never happened. And so the courts, when they went to court on this, looked and said, "Oh, well, obviously this is not a loan that's paid off," and gave the bank the ability to put their deed of trust back on the property and commence foreclosure action. And this was an action that he took in Vancouver, Washington, for Select Portfolio Servicing. So Rob really knows what he's talking about, and what he's trying to say here is, sure, there's media attention on this, and the courts are trying to put pressure on the banks to not just randomly foreclose. But the reality is that even with the MERS situation, the intent is that there was ownership and there is a debt obligation. And so even if there's a bit of a slowdown for a period of time, that is something that's going to be resolved quickly, and banks are going to get right back on their foreclosure track. And that is why some of these banks have been putting a moratorium on, is, again, not to be Mr. Nice Guy, but simply to make sure they have all of the T's crossed and I's dotted so that they can get that foreclosure mill cranked back up and rolling again. And so I would expect that Bank of America very shortly would have their moratorium lifted on all the other states as well. So what does that mean to you and your sellers? Well, what it means is it's business as usual. You know, we can't rely on some mistakes of some banks and a handful of cases where sellers have been able to get their foreclosure thrown out, canceled, stalled because of errors in the bank, because the large majority of them haven't made any errors. And unless your client has a lot of money to throw at it with paying an attorney, Rob himself specifically said, you know, that it's $2,500 easily to just file suit against the trustee, and most of their paperwork's in order and it's going to get thrown out anyway. So unless your client has a lot of money to throw at the situation, that's not really a viable option to stall foreclosure. You know, getting your price to the point where you get an offer and giving us an offer so we can negotiate it with the bank, it allows us to get postponements. And as you know, where Fannie Mae is concerned, you really have to be quite aggressive with making sure the buyer understands the importance of being ready to close as quickly as possible, simply because they're not doing postponements. You also saw some stuff on Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is putting new policies in place where they're not postponing. If you're within 30 days of foreclosure auction, they're not giving you more than 30 days to close, and they're not postponing those foreclosure auctions beyond that period of time, and they're not giving extensions on their approval letters. So anyway, the banks and servicers are tightening things up. The investors are tightening things up. Short sales are still an absolutely excellent market. I would consider them the best market in real estate, because you're able to get to those properties before they go through the mill to the REO and get assigned out to REO agents. And so don't be discouraged by this, but just be aware that you have to get an offer so we can get a postponement, so we can get it closed. And that goes back to all of our Excite price stuff, which you're familiar with, or you can go look at some of my previous videos on the Excite price. But so that's what I have for you this week. If you have questions or want to dialogue about it, please feel free to send me an email. I'd love to hear your thoughts and dialogue about how this affects you. And so have a great week. We're getting ready to wrap up October. Happy Halloween. My kids are going to be Harry Potter and Hermione for Halloween, so they've got their glasses and their robes and their wands, and they're ready to go out and work some magic on Halloween night. So anyway, have a great week. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.